Gallery. It's called Katrina, Mississippi Remembers. And so today we have a panel of our veteran news anchors and professionals who reported on the front lines of one of the most devastating events in American history. So today, joining us, we have Maggie Wade. Maggie is an Emmy-nominated news anchor who reported on Hurricane Katrina from WLBT news station, where she has held multiple roles throughout her career, including weekend weather anchor, news reporter, and coordinator producer of children's programming. Next up, we have Rogelio Solis. Rogelio is a recently retired Associated Press staff photographer in Mississippi, having served 28 years as full-time staffer and a previous 4 years as an AP freelance photographer. After that, we have Hunter Dawkins. Hunter is the Chief Executive Officer and publisher of the Gazebo Gazette in Pasco, Mississippi. He also contributes as a columnist and reporter for Super Talk Mississippi News, sports writer for 228sports.com, and a radio host for Gulfport High School football. We also have Bill Snyder. Bill has spent 34 years in broadcasting, the Biloxi natives currently on his second tour of duty in TV as a Good Morning Mississippi co-anchor at WLOX in Biloxi, where he earned Reporter of the Year in 2023 for the Mississippi Association of Broadcasters. We're also joined by our moderator today, Walt Grayson. Walt is an American anchor, reporter, weatherman, working at WJTV News Channel 12 in Jackson, Mississippi. Previously, he worked for WLBT. So we have a series of questions today just to get our panelists' perspectives, both working and living through Hurricane Katrina. So we're really excited, and we'll let you start us off on our conversation, Walt.
Great, thank you. Whoops, after here, this works better than here. Thank you. Good to see all of y'all. Glad y'all can make it out this morning. My name is Walt Grayson. I will tell you a little bit about my experience, but just one little thing about my experience with Hurricane Katrina. I was living in the Jackson area when Hurricane Katrina came through. I was also living in the Jackson area when Hurricane Katrina came through. Katrina was worse. Let me just say that. Jackson at that time, by the time Camille got here back in '69, it was a good windstorm. And, we thought something had happened, but in all honesty, our electricity didn't even go out of our house. When Katrina came through, 100% of our electric power distribution was without power, and we're 150 miles head off the coast. And it just grew increasingly worse the closer you got to the coast. But I'm just here to moderate. I'm one of these people who were closer to it. Tell us all about it. We're going to start off with one question, and we're going to start on this end with you, Bill, and we'll just go down the line. How about that? Everybody's kind of cuts through the thing.
Two anchors, I would say.
Maggie, I cannot believe you did weekend weather. I need to see that. Because I bet that was fantastic. Anyway, sorry.
No, it really was.
And then there's a microphone over there for all of you. I can pass that around between you here. So, all of you were not only reporting on the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, but also experiencing it firsthand. So, how did you navigate the emotional toll of covering such a catastrophic event, and yet staying professional and committed to your duty as journalist? You want to kick that off, Sheila?
Sure. Can you hear me? Is this one on? Or, okay. Drinking and crying.
Okay.
Okay. Second day, well, the day after, I finally got to my house. I had one tree down. I was extremely blessed. My oldest brother lost their house. His wife swam out of it. She had also, you were talking about Camille, she also swam out of her house on the beach during Camille. Okay, so we have this life preserver in her house that says the unsinkable Pam Snyder, because she swam out of two of the worst storms ever. But that night I got home and my wife was there, my father-in-law, and that was back before digital TV. It was still analog on the rabbit ears. And I saw Nightline, and they were doing a story 3 blocks down from where I grew up, and I lost it. I just lost it, And there were moments like that throughout, but as far as being out in the field, I looked at it like I was almost a soldier or a football player on a battlefield, without obviously that, killer mentality, more like, hey, let's do this story. So that was what kept me going. But I told Walt this, and I'll tell you this real quick. That was in 2005. I got out of TV, got back in 2018. Went to Florida right after Hurricane Michael. That was about 7 months. We were doing a hurricane special. Hey, Bill, I was like, yeah, I'll go down, I got to Panama City. There were a few blue roofs, the blue tarps. I crossed the bridge into Panama City from Panama City Beach, and it hadn't been touched in 6 or 7 months. And I started having these black and white flashbacks. You might remember the old viewfinder, the Viewmaster. It was like that going in my head. I had to pull over and catch my breath because I started hyperventilating. I'm like, what is going on here? I talked to somebody later on after that. They were like, you had PTSD from Katrina. So even when you think you're handling it, it gets to you. So I think those are I think that covers it for me, I suppose.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely, I can acknowledge from your end of the coast, at least on the eastern end of the coast in Biloxi, from my end, when I came home on the western side of the coast, past Christian, basically in Louis, Long Beach area, and I think, Bill, you probably remember this too, walking out on the beach, there was nothing. There was no street signs. There was no
landmarks.
trees. There was no landmark. There wasn't any real place that you could say, hey, this is where I'm at. Okay, this is, and of course, even in Biloxi, the lighthouse with significant damage and all that, that was something that was, of course, breathtaking, not in a good way from the factor that my newspaper began because of Hurricane Katrina, and I was not the founder of the newspaper. Evelina Burnett did a great job. She, I believe, Bill, you might know this better. She's from Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
I believe so. She was from a big paper.
She was from a big paper. She came down, and it was almost a free newspaper the first, 6 months at least, where it was, just getting it out to the community, more or less for community counters. City Hall was destroyed. My whole town was pretty much destroyed. And they were having meetings, city hall meetings at fire stations, even getting city council members to show up. It was really, tough. Police chiefs and things as such, almost a little bit like the pandemic, but from the other level. But I had worked with Evelina, being working for the Attorney General at the time. I began to do PR work with her, and it was something. It was devastation, of course, going through that. But I can only imagine what Rogelio saw too. I mean, from a picture standpoint, because I did not have anything to do with the front lines of that. But I'll let Rogelio tell you guys whatever is going to be happening, at least from that perspective. But absolutely, that's it.
Well, I went down with the wrong attitude, unlike a lot of AP photographers. You go in and you have a sense of the bravado. A lot of us are called the Marines of photojournalism because we're the first line. We're almost always there. Any disaster, we're the first ones there. We're the first ones to report. We're the first ones to get all the news out. So I went down. Bert Moore was the writer that he sent with me. Great writer. He's also retired now. John Bazemore, they shipped over from Atlanta. He's also a colleague of mine, also an AP photographer, also retired. We all retired at the same time. We had kind of a cavalier attitude. I mean, we'd gone through so many hurricanes before, we knew it was bad. But you have to understand that, as Bill said, this is analog, the days of analog. After a certain point, we lose communication with everybody. It's just us. And so we're down there, we kind of have an idea what the severity is that's coming, but we really don't think that. I went down to, with Bert, down to Gulfport Harbor Fuel and Bait Shop, and the owner is packing up. And he stops long enough to have a beer, and he says, I was a little boy when Camille hit. And I was scared as hell. I knew something bad was coming. We're moving out of here because I know something bad is coming. We're not going to be here tomorrow. We're going to go. I know that for a fact. I'm like, okay. Yeah. Water's rising, of course. That evening, we look out in the marina, we see a couple of yachts, boats that are still there. Owners have tied them down, we're gonna handle it. That evening, we're standing on Beach Boulevard as Katrina's coming in. And we're howling. We're howling at the moon, because we're who we are. And there's a van next to us at CNN, and they're not getting out. And one of them rolls the window down and looks at us, and I recognize him, rolls the window up, and I can hear him yelling, "It's those damned AP guys. They're out there howling. What do you expect?" And so they do that, and we're standing there watching. And all of a sudden, one of the yachts that had been tied down to a mooring comes floating right by on Beach Boulevard, Highway 90, right there, and just floating past us. We're stunned. This had to be at least 1,000-pound mooring that had pulled up. It's on its side, but it's floating past us. That's when we knew the severity of it. That's when we had to get out of there. Where we were parked by the First Baptist Church, the facade of the church fell. We could have taken our vehicle out. It didn't. We were lucky. But after that, I started to learn empathy. After that point, because the very next day we are among the first people to hit the ground. And I mean, when the ground is swept clean, and we're out there and we're running into people that have survived, that have stayed in their homes, that shouldn't have, that found places to hide. And they have nothing, and they're shell-shocked, and the empathy begins. Ran into a gentleman, Jose Lopez, who was crying because he was used to stopping at a filling station. It was on Highway 90 and talking to attendant there. He'd become friends with, and she was gone. The facility was gone. There was nothing there. There was a woman we ran into in an apartment complex, was crying. She lost her glasses, and she lost her teeth. And she didn't have a way to communicate with her daughter in Texas that she was alive and living. And there was virtually no bandwidth where we were able to hook her up with our phone. She called her daughter and called and said, "I'm okay." And she was bawling and said, "I lost my teeth. Please help me get my teeth back." Things like that you see firsthand, you start to develop empathy. If you don't have it before, you learn to have it then. Of course, on our end up here, the weather was bad. A tree in front of our house tore up the sewer line. It backed up into the house. My wife was left to handle it by herself, so she was not a happy camper. So it hit us on that end as well. But on the coast, we saw it firsthand, just how bad it was. We saw it through the eyes of the people. And that's what we registered. That's what we photographed. That's what we reported on. And that's what we wrote about. No other perspective of theirs.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm only 5 feet tall, so you'll never see me be one of those reporters standing in the hurricane winds with everything blowing. I made that clear. I was like, no, I have no interest in doing that to show people how powerful the winds are. But I got called in that Sunday night, and we already knew that it was going to be bad and powerful. And they said, be prepared to stay until tomorrow morning. So I came in probably about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I stayed until 4 in the morning after they told us that it was making landfall near New Orleans. At that point, we didn't have a lot of pictures. That was back in 2005. We have lots of video now. I knew it was terrible. I knew it was more than likely going to be deadly. Watching what we did see until I left the station that morning, I didn't know what I was going to come back to the next day. But I went home and I prayed. I took my husband's hand and said, we just need to pray for everyone. The next morning I got up, there were 8 trees in my yard. 2 of them hit our house. I never thought that we would be impacted by it. I knew that there would be some impact, but not that much. And then I got the call from the station that they needed me to come in. We had no power. We didn't have power for 7 days. My parents were elderly. We had made sure that they left their house to be with one of us. Well, then I realized that I had house phone service, but no cell service. My cell phone was completely dead. I couldn't use the cell phone. Then I realized that I couldn't get out of my neighborhood because there were so many trees down. So they sent a photographer to pick me up, and I had to climb over a tree to get to the photographer. I got to the news station, and by then we had sent Skycopter 3, which was the station helicopter, down to the coast. And it was unrecognizable. The only reason I knew it was the Mississippi coast is that you could see the water, you could see the Gulf. And it was devastating. And then when you saw the video from New Orleans and those people begging for help, I had to step out a couple of times, step off the air. And I did a lot of praying during that time. And then I had to remind myself that it wasn't about me. It was about all those people who were suffering. It was about getting information so that we could get help. I remember Governor Haley Barbour, and I have to tell you, he did an amazing job of handling Mississippi resources and getting people to where they needed to be and avoiding the catastrophe like the one they had in New Orleans. He really did a great job. And I can say that he's no longer governor, but he really did. He understood. I remember talking to my neighbor who was, at that time, Senator Trent Lotz. She still is his daughter, but his daughter lived next door, and they had lost their home down the coast. And, she said, but my parents are good. And I held her, and we just cried together. So Hurricane Katrina impacted so many people in the Jackson area, throughout Mississippi. I got a chance to go to some of the southern counties that were closer to the coast and to see the devastation there. It looked like a war zone. And then when you hear from the people, like you said, and people share their stories, you realize, this is something that is going to take years for us to get over. But I guess the biggest thing for me as a journalist was seeing the resilience, seeing the compassion, seeing the love that Mississippians have for each other, seeing them put other people ahead of them. You meet one person and they say, well, I lost everything, but one of my neighbors didn't survive, so I'm focusing on them. And to me, that's Mississippi. That's who we are. And, I hope I never live through another Katrina. I really do. I hope you feel the same way. But Katrina was devastating on so many levels. I ended up changing cell providers because I realized that everybody who had ceasefire still had cell service, and I didn't. And I didn't have cell service for a really long time. And, I remember the first time I heard my mother's voice, and her voice was quivering, and she said, I didn't know if you were okay because we didn't have power and I couldn't turn on the television, and I knew you had work late. And I said, no. I said, I'm good. I said, just pray for the people on the coast and people in the southern counties, because what we're dealing with is nothing compared to what they are. So that's hard when your family doesn't know, and usually she can pop on the television and she can say, okay, yeah, I knew she was at work late, but I hope she got home okay. And so that was terrifying for her, not knowing if I had tried to get home and something had happened. So, it was personal, but it was also professional. And I always say when we get to the point that we don't feel the pain of the people that we serve, it's time for us to go home.
Thank you. When I first heard of Katrina, I didn't pay very much attention to it. Because another storm developed, we had a lot of storms develop, this is another one coming in. And it couldn't be all that bad because, well, everybody knows it's the biggest storm that could ever be. Did you mention Governor Barbour? When I started paying attention to Katrina, is the night before it hit, Governor Barber got on the air and said, we have another Camille-like storm. And that's when I came out the closet, because I knew we probably would have to have a place to hide. So let me take y'all back. Whoa, when did you first hear of Katrina? And what were your first thoughts about it?
So I can tell you this, well, that year, 2004, Hurricane Ivan was coming right at us, went and hit in Orange Beach, boarded up the house, everything, near miss. 2005, we had a couple of tropical storms, but we're used to that. That's like a Tuesday, okay? Hurricane Danny was sort of coming at us, and then it went in over by Pensacola, wasn't as bad. So I'm not going to say people were complacent, but we were used to the rhythm. And I think it was about a week before. Back then, I was a weekend sports anchor, but whenever a storm comes in, we all do news. We cover news because that's the only thing usually going on. So it was I was off Monday, Tuesday, and Tuesday was my golf day. And there was a course just off a pass road that I used to go out there, and they'd hand me the key to the car, And I'm out there playing, and I'm like thinking, I heard about this, and I'm like, Bahamas. And it was just this weird feeling like one of these storms is going to get us. I just don't know how bad. And I remember thinking about it. I was like, am I going to be playing golf next week? And it was one of those, it was a passing thought, And then as we got going, and then the Friday before, we went out to do high school football. And I was sitting there talking to a couple of guys from the Sun Herald, veterans, and we were talking about it. Not saying we were like, well, let's go to Florida. Let's go over to Apalachicola. Go do our story, do football that night. The track had changed. That's when they really started relying on those tracks right around then. And we're like, okay, well, this could be a thing. And literally 24 hours later, you see it explode. I got off work Saturday night, and I'm watching this monster grow, and I'm like, holy crap, it's Camille, and this might be worse. You're seeing the winds, and I was reared on those Camille stories. I was only a year old, but I was reared on all that. And I was like, I've got to get my family out of here, because it just the instinct, this, you could feel it. I can't really describe it, but you could feel it. And the day before, you could just start, people were like, this is the real deal. And people started leaving. But of course, others stayed. And the reason why they stayed, we lived through Camille, we'll live through this. Nothing's going to be as bad as Camille. And they say Camille may have killed more people than Katrina, because of the lure of it, because, hey, we got water, it was up to our steps. This thing just kept going and pushing the water. And then you hear about people in attics. And so it had been building through the week, I guess, to make a long story short. But you could feel it as the week went on. It's like, this is different. We better get ready or we're going to be in trouble.
Well, and Bill summarized it pretty completely the way that it went down. And I want to say, Bill, it's not so much what happened then, but I want to talk about what's happening now. When we get, even a wind in the Gulf of Mexico, EMA is sending us massive text reports. Harrison County EMA is all over it like that because of that psyche. That's the problem. At least that was the devastation of the storm. It was the psyche that it created. It was more or less, not just from the people, but from the government agencies, from the officials. Anybody that went through this down south of Hattiesburg, it pretty much was set in tone. And all the government agencies, all the preparation, even stores, all the economic input, it get pretty much the gas stations and all. If there's something serious, then they either start, closing stations down, building up toilet paper, building up supplies and things like that. The Walmart in Pasadena, Christiana, I live, they start packing things up because they realize that something could potentially be. Even though this has been 20 years, the psyche in my community, and I know in Bill's community, changed quite a bunch. And that's something that it still remains evident. And I'm sure Rogelio can talk a little bit about that.
We were made aware, because again, the stays on top of the news, of the direction it was coming and of its growth. Bert and I went on ahead and started preparing, because we were essentially told, at that time, Mississippi, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, all had staff tolerance. So you protected your coast. That is your turf. That is your territory. So we knew we were going down. We, arranged for rental vehicles because we didn't want to trash our own. And we weren't really sure about how bad it was going to be. Stocked up on water, tuna, peanut butter, bread. I turned my vehicle into a rolling gas station. I had 10 5-gallon containers of gas on it. I smelled horrible. All I smelled was gas. Well, we were ready. We went down early. And Bert and I were only able to get one room, so we shared it. We had dinner at a Chinese restaurant, and they were pushing food. Everything was cooked, everything. Take out everything. They wanted to get rid of everything they had because they knew that they would not be able to save any of it because they would lose power. So everything, one more egg rolls here, just tossing it at us. We were ready, but we weren't ready. Harrison County lost, their emergency management director had retired that day before. That was his last day. So there was nobody in place, nobody on their end. And so no matter all our preparations, we really weren't ready. Nobody was. Nobody anticipated the force of the wind and the water. The fire stations that were close by that had supplies were decimated, destroyed, gone. I stood in Trent Lott's house 2 days afterwards. Stood where the kitchen used to be and called out to my wife and said, "You're not going to believe where I'm standing." "What?" "In Trent Lott's kitchen." "Oh, was he there?" And I said, "No, but the slab is." And when I ran into him a couple of months later, I said, "Well, so how do you see yourself?" "Oh, I'm a slab on it." "Ask Google. I own a slab." Bert and I interviewed a gentleman, an attorney, who had his $1 million house in Pascagoula. He had it designed so it would stand any hurricane, any tornado. He had gotten his asbestos settlement and part of the Dickey Scruggs group, and he was just bragging about how it was, but he was moving everything out. Just in case a little water gets in there. It was gone. It was gone. And this was made out of brick, steel, gone. The force of the water and the force of the wind caught people by surprise. And we no longer had, because of all the tornado, all the hurricanes, all the tropical storms we've had, it has slowly eroded the defense we had down on the coast. Those little islands, those were our first line of defense. That's one reason why I felt so bad for the folks over in Louisiana, not necessarily New Orleans. I felt bad for them, yes. But that was a man-made disaster waiting to happen. Because anytime you have guys that mow the lawn and you say, well, they're going to inspect and check the levees, they're going to report back. And that's the best you can do as far as engineering safety? No. St. Bernard Parish, they took a hit, a major, just like we did. And they weren't prepared. And we weren't prepared. None of our areas were prepared. And if you look and see how the communities are designed, they are right along the beach, which means businesses, hotels, restaurants, residences are gone. Churches are gone. Although there was one church that miraculously, water got on downstairs and came up to the second floor because of the 25-foot surge, and it never affected the choir robes. Choir robes were just perfect, perfect. Everything else got wet, but not the choir robes. And I never forgot that. I was standing there looking and taking a picture, like, yeah, this is the blessed church. I probably need to come for Sunday service, but these guys don't have good to the Lord. But we were not ready down the coast, and kudos to the government for stepping up. But we didn't even have a communication system at that time. Now, afterwards, yes, they developed a communication system. And now it is much different. But to give you an idea how really unprepared our news agency was, we received 4 sat phones, satellite phones, but they'd all been programmed to work from the Caribbean. So we're standing there with useless sat phones. We can't call out, transmit, do anything. We had to wait till 2 days later when we had a technician bring us the proper chips to install into our sat phones so we could use. So again, communication was very, very difficult. And we were talking about the communications. I have a few things to say about Good Morning America. You really don't want to hear it.
We heard about Katrina probably a week when it was still, forming, and we did what we normally do. And I know the news media is oftentimes called alarmist, but from what we were hearing from MEMA, the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency, we knew to take this storm seriously. And I remember calling the executive director of MEMA at the time, and he said, I hope you all get the message out, telling people, on the coast as much as possible, they need to leave. And he said, I'm going to be honest with you, from what I'm seeing with this storm, and this was probably about 3 days out, if people stay, we're not going to be able to get to them. We're not going to be able to send crews out to get them, and we're not going to be able to put the lives of our first responders at risk. And he said, I'm telling you, they need to leave. And so, at that point, I'm kind of thinking, well, that's kind of what they always tell us. But 2 days out, he was stressing it even more. And I don't know if any of you remember the news, the interviews that we had where they were saying, get out and get out now. And there were some people who took that seriously. But I can tell you one of the things that really just really broke my heart was when I heard national news anchors saying, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they just leave? You never know what situation some people didn't have transportation. Some of them were elderly and had nowhere to go. Some of them didn't have the resources. So that's one question I never ask is, why do they stay? I hope they won't, but I don't ask that on the air. And so the closer we got by that Friday, we all knew that we were going to have to come in and we were probably going to have to do extremely long shifts. The Saturday, watching it and seeing the NOAA, the satellite images that they had, it was a monster. It was a monster. And we knew that it was going to be a monster. What we didn't know is that how far inland it was going to impact Mississippi. Because when you think about Jackson, and I live in Rankin County, think about people that were closer. And Jackson took a major hit. In September, Montel Williams invited me to come as his first guest co-host to talk about Hurricane Katrina. And I was amazed at some of the people in the audience, even though they had seen images and video and all of this stuff, and they were confused. They were really confused. They didn't understand. Everybody was focused on New Orleans, and we needed to focus on New Orleans, but they didn't understand how much of a hit Mississippi took. And I was so glad that I got a chance to let them know my real name is Magnolia. I'm named after my grandmother. I love Mississippi. And let me tell you, yes, we have to help New Orleans. We have to have compassion, empathy, and my heart goes out to them. But yes, Mississippi took a hit. We were not immune, and we were not excluded from the impacts of Hurricane Katrina. And they really thought we were. They really and truly, I could not believe it. And so that was another thing that we had to do nationally, is let people understand. And then we finally started getting some of the national outlets to show the impact of Hurricane Katrina, not just on New Orleans, but on Mississippi and other states as well. And like you mentioned, St. Bernard Parish, because everyone was focused on New Orleans and, people on top of roofs and this kind of thing. And again, we needed to give that attention, but we couldn't forget about everybody else too. So I was really, really proud that I got a chance to talk about Mississippi nationally and how our people have been impacted.
Couple observations real quick. Who was the mayor of Biloxi at that time?
That was A.J. Holloway, just mayor, and he's now deceased.
The reason to bring that up is because we got a soundbite from him. What you were saying a while ago, he's put it pretty succinctly. He said Hurricane Camille killed more people in 2005 than it did in 1969, when it did. Because in 2005, so many people did not get out of the way of Katrina because they said, oh, we made it through Camille, we'll be all right. And it goes back to what I said a while ago. Up until that time, we thought Camille was the biggest storm that had ever hit the universe, except for that big red spot on Jupiter. Other than that.
Yeah.
And then, and radio. What was that church? I want to go hear that choir. They must be special.
I wish I could remember. I just recall going into the church, seeing how the wood, older Episcopalian church, AME church, if I'm correct, and the wood had come up, and the benches were all covered with dirt and mud. And I went upstairs. I forgot what the heck notice here. And I looked out over the balcony and what all this disaster, took some snaps, turned around, and there's the closet, and there's mud leading up to it, and the wire roots are immaculate, untouched, not a drop of water, anything at all.
Was it a golf course?
No, I want to say Basin Road.
Okay.
And looking at all that, and Maggie made a good point. Mississippi was ignored the very first day. And nobody's from an ABC affiliate. Well, kind of.
Yeah.
We're sisters.
Yeah.
Go ahead and talk about it. I'm scared. Just say it.
The morning of, Katrina hit that evening, and that morning, I'm at what was then the Hampton residents are in Gulf. And the majority of the rooms are taken up by, there's only a few for media. CBS Radio's there, AP's there. Everything else is local law enforcement, Leo's, sheriff's, police department, and Mississippi Power. People are there. They managed to hook the generator and hook the little television set, little black and white TV set, and put it in the community room. And so we're all in there. We're having our bowl of cereal because we're all eat there, and we're watching. Good Morning America comes, and everybody goes shh, shh, shh. So everybody's quiet, and they're showing these aerial shots. And I'm like, where the hell's this?
Yeah.
Do you recognize it? No, that's not the Coliseum, is it? No. What is that odd? Is that New Orleans? And they're talking about how terrible it is and the people. And again, we are feeling for them, but we realize at that point, we're not part of the equation. And so they're talking about how terrible it is. And people are now running over to the Superdome so they can find shelter and get help. And then, and I don't want to say which one of the people, the television personalities that were talking, but then they say, we got to cut commercial, and we understand there's some damages.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they go on. And we understand there's some damages. This is a room with about 150 people crammed into a room that maybe could take 25 people. And we hear those words. And you hear a pin drop. And one gentleman looks at us, looks at everybody, goes over the TV set and turns it off. That's it. And we walk out. Good Morning America. I've never watched Good Morning America since then because of that. Now, granted, we lost all communication on the Gulf Coast. C-Spire worked up here. Nothing worked down there except T-Mobile. T-Mobile had one salesperson thought could get me the transmitter just in case. So there was one transmitter, a portable transmitter they had set up. I had a T-Mobile air card. My cell phone that the company had given me was AT&T, C-Spire. Bert had a C-Spire cell phone, dead. Verizon, dead. Everybody else, dead. The T-Mobile allowed us to move some pictures out the very first day until the local law enforcement found out that they had a transmitter and commandeered it. That was it. We lost our bandwidth. And that happened. So later on, days later, weeks later, we had visits from officials from AT&T, T-Mobile, and C-Spire that came and claimed, oh, we're going to have a retraction. We can't have that story out there. And we told them, no, we were there. I was there. This is the transmitter. Don't. But you were not there.
Yeah.
And they gave us all sorts of stories. And when they found out that these other companies had somehow managed to tunnel in and get a hold of their bandwidths and were charging for usage, but they weren't really, delivering anything. They just want your credit card number. They immediately said, well, that's not supposed to happen. The law prohibits that. But we even had one public information officer from one of these companies come out crying that her job was on the line because of what we said, and she was going to be fired. And I said, well, I hope you have a good rest of it. Because, no. And two vice presidents from Atlanta from AT&T came, and they left very unhappy with their heads, tucked down. But the truth of the matter is that when it hit, the coast was not prepared. AT&T's offices were flooded. Took out their entire operation down the Gulf Coast. Now, this is the second time it happened. It happened during Camille, because they didn't move.
Yep.
They didn't think. I mean, again, how can you move? You move to a higher ground. You move to a separate location. No. That was then. That's the type of setup that we had back then. Now it's different. You have incredible satellites, and for that matter, the sat phones that we use are dinosaurs. There's a system called Starlink. I don't know if you're like Elon Musk, but he's put it in place. But it is going to enable first responders, people that have connections, to transmit out, to communicate out. Whereas before, you didn't have it.
I think you pointed out two things. I think that overall, that we in Mississippi who were here at that time take away from that, and that's one. The coast was not prepared. Mississippi was not prepared, and a lot of the reason that we weren't prepared is just because AT&T didn't move after Camille because they knew this could never happen again. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that so much of what happened in Mississippi was overshadowed, and to this day, if you ask anybody outside of Mississippi about Camille, they'll talk about New Orleans. And we had from Burlington, Mississippi to Pascagoula, Mississippi, on over to where Forrest Gump's from, over in Alabama, was torn. Well, I won't say to hell because there's people in here, but it was really messed up. I don't know if they have time for another question or not. One observation real quick from anybody who wants to take it. We talked about the national media and how, as far as we're concerned, they got the story all wrong. How important was it to have local media there?
It was absolutely vital, Walt, because what Raj said and what you said, 6-8 months after I got out of TV, I was working for a community college. President Bush ended up coming to the 2006 graduation. When our president, the college president, went to Washington, somebody asked him, did y'all have any, same thing, did y'all have any damage? I heard it hit New Orleans. He goes, no. New Orleans had their problems. The storm hit us, and that was the prevailing wisdom of it. And it was tough, but talking about the local, we basically stayed on with our generator. There was a big tower in our parking lot. It fell in the parking lot. If it had fallen the other way, we would have had casualties. We're about 2-3 blocks off the water. We stayed on. We moved out of the studio because it was shaking. We moved into the little green room where guests come to, get ready to come on the show. Set up in there, broadcast in there with our generator, and we did that. But that Monday night, all I heard was helicopters. And just, that's it. It was so dead quiet. The only communication we had was a sat phone, and we had a ham radio operator. I will always love those guys and folks at ham. It helped us communicate, and that was the legacy of it. It's just like Haley Barber said, we pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps, I think was the quote, and just did what we had to do. It was tough seeing New Orleans get all that attention, and it was awful, but knowing that we just got wiped out. But a lot of people were like, okay, let's just do what we can do. And that was the best part about it. For about 3 weeks, there was no black or white. There was no Republican, Democrat. There was none of that. It was people helping people no matter what. And for those 3 or 4 weeks, I kept thinking, wow, this is why I got into TV. We're helping people. I could go so far as to say maybe we're saving lives with the info we put out. So, yeah.
Well, as Bill said, that was obviously a huge portion of that. One of the best things about in my community and the pretty much for sale of the Mississippi Gulf Coast is that Robin Roberts was from my area. And her family, her mother and father were still alive then. And she helped us raise tons of money, just being on TV and trying to get, pretty much helping build a new middle school for us, or at least where the old high school was, really being able to raise funds. And she brought in a number of other groups like the Mennonites and some other charity groups and really that, if it had not been for that connection, it would have been very hard for us, at least all the way above. And of course, President Bush came down, Pastor Shan, and as Bill remembers, and really made some great moves. Him and Congressman Gene Taylor, who I worked for in DC at the time, were really instrumental on making things happen like that.
It was good noticing how people responded. Gene Taylor and his son, as I recall, spent the night, it was Katrina night, in a boat at their house. And of course, their house was wiped out. And they were walking the street to get to assistance the day after the storm.
Well, and the Bay Bridge was blown down.
Yes, the Bay Bridge had been, remember, both ends.
Yeah.
The bridge had been taken out. So it really isolated Mississippi. We were just an island. Like I said, there was virtually no communication, but nobody thought about it. We became that landmass in between New Orleans and Florida.
Oh, the landmass.
It was very frustrating because when we finally did start getting the national attention, there was gratefulness, but there was also an attitude among many residents that you're like that fish that's been sitting in the refrigerator for 4 days, uncovered, and it's starting to smell. Either come in, roll your sleeves up and help, or get out.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There was a hippie group, I have no other name to call them, the Rainbow Family, that came down Ocean Springs that morning. And they set up camp.
Yep.
And they fed people for several weeks. They tied in with a very conservative Baptist group that brought medical professionals down. And they set up a tent city, basically. And they took care of everybody. Everybody. And these conservative Baptists were like, yeah, they're kind of weird and they dress funny, but they're good. They're helping out. And they brought in people and they took care of people. Didn't matter who you were. I had a unique situation that I was able to both work in Mississippi primarily the first few weeks, and then they shipped me over to New Orleans to help out because Bill Haver, who was a staff photographer down there at that time, his family had lost everything except, I think he was only to maintain his house, and he lost one floor of his house. That's what it is, got flooded. He lost his boats in the middle of Lake Pontchartrain, so it's probably still there. But he had to take a break. It was killing him. He had to make sure his family was okay, his parents and all. So I came in and helped out, covered different areas. So I had a chance to see a lot of the damage. They also sent me to Baton Rouge to work out of there at the facility so I could interview and photograph everybody from the governor through Honorary, General Honorary, who is they put in charge.
Russell Honor.
And so I had a chance to see all this, but I had the unique knowledge of having been on the Gulf Coast, having seen it come in through Mississippi, seeing what it had done to New Orleans, seeing what it had done to St. Bernard Parish. And while I am empathetic towards New Orleans, I will always care about our people and the people of St. Bernard Parish because they got the boot. They got the boot from Hurricane Katrina. New Orleans, that's an engineering man-made problem. If you look at the leakage, it was from where it broke. It's terrible it happened. Hopefully they will never have to face it again. But again, if you're already building your city under the sea level, you have that problem. You have a chance. Trouble.
I think local news is critical, especially in situations like that. And that's why I hope all of you will always support local media, whether it's television. We're losing so many of our papers and, you know, I'm old fashioned. I like to hold the paper. I do some online stuff too, but it's so important to support local media. But to tell you, one of the things that really brought how in the dark the nation was is we had a Miss Mississippi. I cover Miss Mississippi. I've been covering it since 1995. And her hometown was Pearlington. Pearlington was wiped out. So when she went to Miss America, she wrote a song, she played piano, and it was about Pearlington and the devastation, but also the resilience and the love of community. And the Miss America audience was like, and when I tell you she was super talented, had a beautiful voice, the song resonated with everybody else, but the national audience, where's Pearlington? Did they get hit? Did Mississippi get hit? What is she talking about? They had no clue. And, you know, of course she didn't win Miss America, but again, it showed you we were forgotten in so many ways. And local media didn't let the world forget Mississippi. Our people were on the ground, and we stayed on the ground for months, making sure that the people of Mississippi knew what was going on in Mississippi. And again, that didn't mean that we didn't care about our neighboring state of Louisiana, but we wanted people to understand the devastation that we had here. And I have to say our congressional delegation, our state leaders did everything they could to make sure that people didn't forget. But you have to remember that sometimes with the national media, they go for the most sensational. And what happened in New Orleans was, you know, it was an attention grab. And so that's where they focused. But thanks to our local media, we did not allow the world and the rest of this nation to forget Mississippi.
Real quick on that, I'll tell you one quick story. A buddy of mine, one of my neighbors was 2 houses down from me. They evacuated to Mobile. Didn't know if their house was there. And our neighborhood did fairly well compared to some others. But he lost, you know, he was panicking. He said, Bill, I got to Goche, and we were simulcasting on the radio, our TV station. He said, I heard your voice, and I started crying because I knew everything was going to be okay. And I'm like, wait, what? Me? He said, you were talking about MREs, meals ready to eat. It was something we were killing time. Hey, we've got these. And he said he lost it because he was like, I heard my home and everything was going to be okay. That's a little thing, but the local news, it's vital.
Walt was, since you were up here, maybe with Maggie,
He was with us.
I know, at the time.
That's what it's called back in the day.
Yeah.
If I'm correct, NPR was on radio the whole time.
NPR state on radio.
And I remember listening to them as I went down, and until I lost my signal, I heard them. And that was reassuring to a lot of people because there's no local communication.
They did a lot of lost and found too. I mean, these radio stations are doing this. They've got, you know, the such and such families in McGee, they're looking for the rest of the family, you know, just call us and we'll get y'all in contact.
What they did, they reached out and they were Mississippi.
Yep.
Pure Mississippi. They helped
That's big.
the people on the coast.
I'll tell you one piece of wisdom that I have carried with me ever since Katrina. It may have been a week or so later, I was doing a story in Biloxi. I thought it'd be interesting to see what Katrina had done to the Camille Monument, and it just almost obliterated it. And so was there. These two ladies were taking that and doing stroll. Now, since then, it's become a joke, but I actually heard them, and it was the first time I ever heard them. One lady said to the other, "The next time I see Jim Cantori from the Weather Channel setting up 2 blocks from my house 2 days early, I'm getting on the road." Since then, every weather event we've had, I ask, is Jim Cantori there? So, thank you all so much for being here.
We're going to turn it over to questions.
Okay.
So, does anybody have a quick question or two for our panelists or Walt?
What did Haley Barber say about buckling your pants and buckling your belt?
Yeah, it was,
What was that?
he said, Mississippi residents are tough. We're gonna pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and rebuild and get to work.
But he said buckle your belts and pull up your pants.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bootstraps.
Well, and also, just to echo that too, the state legislature later on that year, they passed the law to move casinos inland because of the destruction of Treasure Bay and Harris and a number of the Grand Casino Biloxi, Grand Casino Gulfport. That was a very important thing, and that was a very harsh thing in the legislature. I'm not sure, Rogelio, you might remember that better than I do, but it was a close vote that they said there.
It was a close vote. The barges that were at the casino had gone across Highway 90 and were there. They were landlocked now, destroyed. And people were coming there, and, you know, if you had a crowbar and you pull one of those one-armed bandits and it broke open, you got maybe nickels. Because by state law, the Gaming Commission required that certain amounts of money be taken out, you know, cash dollars, that sort of thing. So there wasn't that much money. I went into a couple of the casinos because one of our writers came down from Las Vegas. He made connections with the owners of one of the big Baileys, I think. So we went in one of the casinos, and you could see where all the premium liquor was taken, all the cheap stuff was left. It had been appropriated. So it's a nice way of putting it. So there were those things going on. You just had one of my favorite pictures of this people coming out of a ski and surf shop, and they are holding bikinis. And these are rather appropriated. These are some large individuals coming out there, and they see us taking pictures, and one lady demands, "What are you doing?" And we said, "We're taking pictures of people looting." And she starts yelling, "Ain't no looting here, ain't no looter in here, not at all, no lootering." And she yells out, and these guys come up in these go-karts, because there used to be a go-kart,
Right.
and miniature golf facility on the Gulf Coast, and they come zipping up in the golf cart with shotguns and coming at us. We jump on our vehicle and we take off. Now, my vehicle stayed a filling station because I lost my vehicle for the most part. The roof of the Hampton ended up on my vehicle. So I was able to replace the windshield, and I was able to drive to Jackson. Luckily, I'd taken out the insurance, so it only cost me $500, and they just marveled at it and called in people from other enterprise agents to take pictures next to the vehicle that survived Katrina. The Holbert Moore's vehicle, he lost all his lights, all his windows. So when we drove, we held our flashlights out the window. Those were our headlamps as we drove at night. So that was bad. Every one of us took a bad hit because the emergency management and a lot of first responder vehicles were parked at the Harrison County Emergency Management Office. The parking lot, the building itself could survive anything. They knew it. The problem was that the parking lot was filled with shells, oyster shells. that the ladies from the community had arranged for them to put there because they thought it'd be very pretty. And it is. The problem is, if you've ever had an oyster shell in your hand, you know how sharp the edges are. Well, with all that wind, it's swirling and it starts slicing tires. So all of a sudden you had all these vehicles, these first responder vehicles that were just left there, unusable. I had a couple of fix a flat cans in my truck. I went to another place and one of these AutoZone type, and it was gone. And I went, what's going on? And apparently law enforcement came and commandeered and took everything because they were getting flats everywhere. It didn't matter. Their vehicles were taking flats, and that's fire engines, ambulances, police vehicles, emergency vehicles. So it was bad. It was rough for us down there, Gulf Coast.
Well, thank you all to our panelists. Thank you all for moderating. Thank you all for coming out. We do have another gallery talk that is going to highlight art and photography. Our photographer of our exhibit, Melanie Golding, will be on June 5th. So we would love to see y'all come back out here and take a minute to walk through and just to soak in some of these stories like the panelists were saying. But thank you all so much for your time. Thank y'all for coming out.